I'm Vamsi Krishna. I'm a speculative architect and designer based in Frankfurt, Germany. So I've been here for the past 6 years, and I currently also serve as the co-founder of Futurely, a platform for architectural and design education online. So that's kind of briefly what I do right now. It was never meant to be an initial idea that I wanted to get into architecture. It was my passion towards world building, animation, and cinema as a whole, and gaming. So that's what led me into architecture, because the closest thing back in the day, which was also more tangible and which was also kind of understandable as a profession, was architecture, and which brought the interesting elements from that and also make it into real life, concrete. So that's how I decided to choose architecture when I was in my high school. Like when I was finishing my high school, I decided, and my dad is an educator himself, so he was showing me a lot of options. So he serves as a director of an institution. So I got to visit them, understand how architecture works and what kind of software they use, because that is something that fundamentally drives my interest. I wanted to be very tech savvy in a profession like architecture. So that's where I picked my bag of interests and then started my journey in an architecture school. It's more like a love-hate relationship, which I have with my place that I grew up the most in Chennai, south of India. So that's where I grew up most of my life. And when I was there, I did not realize the value or the importance of the place. But then when I came away from there to Frankfurt in Germany, that's when I realized how much it has really given me, and I have a special affinity and connect to the place. So there is a lot of influence that happens and that I get from my growing up there, because of the culture of using technology is something that a lot of peers are very interested in, and cinema is a huge thing in India in general. So that was also another major influence, and gaming. So those are the kind of elements I kind of grew up with, and so that influenced how I started becoming to be. Yeah, I think what's interesting with me is I particularly do not have a connect with the place in the architectural sense. It's mostly the people, the surroundings, surrounding in the sense, the time I spend with different people. That has been my major influence. Because in general, I am a bit of an introvert, the way I approach and the way I do things. So having said that, I think more than the place, it is my time I have taken to build these connections. And that's what made it really fruitful. Like for instance, we see this beautiful architecture in Frankfurt right now around us. But then the kind of connections I got to build being in this place is what I really enjoy, more than the city itself. What happened is I finished my education in India. This was around 2013, the undergrad of architecture, and I started getting into the practice field of architecture. There I met Mr. Bhargav. I worked with their practice for about 3 years. He was one of my initial mentors during my education, and he is an architect there who specialized in hospital planning and design. And I really got to explore my fullest potential during my journey there, because I was a sort of a junior architect when I started off, and then I grew all the way into a senior associate in 3 years. So I could see a sort of a catapulting that happened with my career. And at the same time, I was also concerned, because I got to see the different dimensions of professional practice, and I got to a point where I wanted to question myself if this is the path that I wanted to pursue, or is there more creative, rich path that I wanted to explore. And I think that's when I decided to take a pause with my professional career. And I was at core, at heart, I'm a good designer. That's how I really think about myself. That's one of my core strengths. So then I pursued, and I was researching a bunch of schools, and just to avoid the conventional cliche of going to America, I decided to come to Europe. And this school, Stadel is the one that I studied at. And it was one of the most interesting schools with an interesting program, which was focused on design research. And I really wanted to pursue this, and that's how I came here in 2015. And that completely opened up a whole new world, which I was never used to before. And I think that has significantly influenced my second leg of the architecture journey, or the career path that I'm taking right now. One of the core mentors that, like I mentioned earlier, was Mr. Bhargav, who was my initial mentor when I started my professional career. I think what I got to learn is the economics, the business side of the practice, how architecture works. That was something we are never taught in the architectural schools, and we only get bombarded with it at once when we get into the practice. So that was very interesting for me, and that was a whole different revelation of how the practice works. I think that has really been like a fruitful foundation, because I took my strengths as a designer and then I built my business skills along the way from there. So that being one of the most foundational persons. And then the next person or next two people that I would like to quote is my mentor in Stadel, Professor Johan, and my tutor Damian. Currently he serves as an instructor at SciArc. He's also pursuing his research there. So these are really two key people that kind of shaped a whole different me along the process. Because until that point I came here, until the point I came to Frankfurt, I, like many others in the world, was preconceived with the idea that architecture is supposed to be practiced in a very specific way, until they opened up our minds here and then showed that there can be plenty more possibilities of pursuing architecture. And that's when I got introduced to the digital side of design, the speculative side of design, the research side of design that happens, and the discourse surrounding it. And that was really fascinating for me, I think. And that has been an influential component in how I've been growing up right now. Day to day, like I mentioned before, right now I'm fully serving as the co-founder of Futurely, and I'm occupied almost all the time with Futurely, because this is a very interesting venture that we decided to start during the beginning of the pandemic. My partner in crime, Eric, and I, we just took this decision over a Zoom call, and that was it. And what's interesting is we had never met in the past. Like, we only met thrice in our life so far. And right now we are working full time on a project that's probably going to take a lot of our time in the next few years. So that's how it all started. And right now my day-to-day work is primarily helping in building the platform, supporting it, and making this whole platform available and accessible to architects and designers all over the world. So that's our vision, and that's what we are working towards. So on a daily basis, if I have to go into a micro level, we deal with a lot of participants, students with interesting inquiries, interesting things that they want to learn from us, and networking with instructors, meeting new people, bringing them on board, and setting up new courses. So that's the kind of managemental tasks that go in, and then building new websites, building new platforms, building new learning experiences for them. That's on the technical side. That's the kind of work I am dealing with on a daily basis. I think for me that was an interesting phase when I quit the professional side of architecture, and then when I completed my master's here, and then I wanted to get into a phase of consulting. So VR and AR was one of my fascinations that I developed during my time at Stadel, and I really wanted to pursue a career in that path. So during that time, I started a consulting organization called FluxReal, again a global cloud-based organization, and we were a global team, and we were functional for 2 years. That is until the pandemic started. And then I was developing some applications for a trading company in Switzerland. So I did migrate a lot into the technical side of the profession. So I was working with software developers, software engineers, and also on the VR and AR side, I was working with musicians and gaming artists, like texture artists, 3D modeling artists, and sculptors, all in the virtual space and virtual domain. So I was working with these people, and then building small projects or prototypes, and also worked with a couple of artists and helped them develop their augmented reality based exhibits and so on. And while all this was kind of laying a foundation, I was also teaching in parallel. I used to conduct some workshops and events in different parts of the world, primarily in Europe and Asia. And one fine day, Eric contacted me about this idea, like, hey, how about we start doing all this online? Because we realized the amount of time we spent in traveling to a place and the amount of logistics for everyone getting the visas and all of that was so much of a hassle that we could only do like 2 or 3 events in a year when we are trying to do something global. But now we have the opportunity and we have the possibility, because architects and designers themselves are migrating to more virtual and digital forms of communication, and which means it's a behavioral change that every one of us are going to get. And that's what made us decide that we should go all in and pursue this idea. It's a bit of a trick question, I think. What I would say is it's primarily possible for me, in my case, after coming to Europe, that I definitely agree with that. But I wouldn't deny the fact that maybe if I was not in a core architectural profession, I would have been able to develop a lot of these ideas even in India. Because what happens with most architects is, at a traditional level, they only communicate and interact with other architects. So our circle and the body of knowledge is kind of contained, and it floats around between different architects. But when it comes to becoming more interdisciplinary, you discover that a lot of people around you are able to use technology in much better ways and much advanced ways. And especially coming from India, India is one of the tech hubs in the world. So we have a very high skilled pool of technical workers all around the world. And so that's when I realized a lot of interesting ideas have been pursued and are already implemented from a non-architectural background as well. And I think that is something we need to borrow and learn from. So although I took a lot of time, only after I came here, I saw the sort of a liberation that can happen through the course that I learned here. I could have maybe, if I had taken a slightly different career path, discovered some of these things back there. I'm actually glad that you asked this question, because that is fundamentally what we try to do with Futurely. And having studied in a school like that as well, although it's not as expensive or not as flamboyant as some of the American schools or the Ivy League schools, I had to pay a lot, I had to pay a huge price to be able to get here and take a huge chunk of savings or financial discipline. It takes a lot to get here. But with Futurely, what we try to do is to break that barrier that we have because of these boundaries and inaccessible body of knowledge. We want it to be able to be available and distributed all over the world. And that's our mission. And so we are trying to make it as accessible as possible. And since we are also a business, we're trying to work in such a way that we are not a non-profit organization where we want people to come and teach for free and go away. It has to be beneficial for the entire ecosystem, for the participants who are coming from different parts of the world, and the instructors who are teaching again from different parts of the world, and as a platform for us to develop and grow. So that is something we constantly work on. And just yesterday, we managed to launch our subscription model, which is our completely newest development. This has been on our mind for the past 1.5 to 2 years, ever since we started Futurely. And right now we are making it available for 10 euros a month, like your Netflix or Amazon Prime or other subscription models. And that's how we are trying our best to make it accessible. So one other thing that we understood over time is although we are trying to be as democratic, as accessible as possible, there is still a lot of requirement, a lot of support that is needed from the institutions, because when participants engage with us, they get to engage with a very short time frames, short time periods on an intense format. So they get a taste of something that they can potentially pursue. So how we are working is we are trying to bridge a gap between the institutions and architects who want to pursue certain ambitious careers or ambitious career paths in different streams within architecture and in and around architecture and design. So we see ourselves evolving more as a bridge, as a plug-in educational system that fits in with all sorts of institutions, all sorts of current academic circles, so that we are able to accelerate the way they work and produce better results. So that is something that we want to support and work with a lot of institutions worldwide. Yeah, when a lot of people come for their master's programs, they come at different points of their career, and some have a better advantage over the others. So it's never an even ground when they start their courses or their masters. And that is also where we can help bridge the gap by giving them the skills, so that everyone's at the same level and then they can pursue their research or career better. Instead of spending a lot of time, when you're there for an year or two, you would want to utilize it to the fullest and get the most of it. So if you spend time in learning some skill that you were supposed to be learning or familiar with earlier, that is something you don't want to go to a master's and discover it. You can be better equipped and prepared beforehand, and then you can focus on the core conceptual framework of what the school wants to offer. I think right now I'm not pursuing as a full-time instructor at Futurely, because that's something we decided a long time ago, that if we start this platform, it has to be a lot bigger than us and better than us. And that's also why we invite a lot of instructors on board all the time and start curating courses around them. We are trying to provide the infrastructure for them so that they can do what they do better, and then we can support them. So that's how it has been going. But having said that, I do have some topics of interest that I constantly pursue on the side. And this is like an ongoing research. I'm primarily interested in the idea of the metaverse, virtual and augmented reality. Those have been a fascination for the past almost 5 years, let's say, even before all this pandemic happened or the crypto boom happened. So that is a domain that I constantly want to engage with, and I try to conduct courses or workshops whenever there's an opportunity with like recently we did a collaboration with the Bartlett, or sometimes we do something with the Digital Futures, then we explore these ideas there. And meanwhile, we keep developing some projects or ideas and keep working on them over time. So that's something I'm interested in. And another thing that has been a recent fascination is finance and investments, and how do architects and designers can take hold of it better, then make much more wiser decisions and plan a more fulfilling career. Because although we don't talk about it, a lot of architecture schools or architects in general look at it as a taboo, and then they try to avoid conversations around it. But I think this is highly essential, that we have to start integrating it into the conversations, the discourse more. And that's something that I want to start communicating to people, start sharing with people as well. Right. I think one of the hardest things for me was, if I have to put it in a single phrase, trying to do everything all at once. That was the hardest thing or the hardest debate that I ever faced. I faced it almost for 2 years. So this was one of the periods when I graduated from my master's, and as I told you, I was pursuing consulting in VR, AR, and a bunch of other things, developing our own project. For me personally, I have a lot of interests and ideas that I wanted to carry over and take control of, or pursue it, learn it, and I wanted to do it all at once. And that is a debate that I had to deal with, and realized over time that it is better to take it one step at a time, like focusing on something specific, progressing somewhere, getting more grip of it, and then move to another topic. It could be a hobby, it can be a skill that you want to learn. So that took me a long time, and I was quite stressed out. I was quite chaotic when I was trying to do it all at once. And at the same time, it was so much of pressure and burden over me. And now I've completely reorganized, changed the way I work, because at some point I started eliminating a lot of the distractions that I didn't want in my life. Right now, I kind of work with a sort of a priority lists, or if something is just a mere fascination for a short period of time, I don't want to pay attention to it. I want to work with a long-term game, with a long-term idea. And so which also requires a lot more dedication and commitment, and that's what I'm trying to slowly incorporate into my schedule and routine. And this is something very hard, I think, for us as creatives and designers to get into it, because as creatives we are always inspired from different pieces, different things all around, so we are always distracted, I think, as architects or creatives in general. And trying to filter out and stay focused, staying narrow with your thoughts is something that has been a very hard shift for me. And that was, I would say, one of the hardest things that I learned.
And looking to the future, I think that you want to do or to learn in the future?
Yeah, I think I would probably borrow some ideas from this interesting book by James Clear called Atomic Habits. So I'm starting to integrate small, simple habits, small, simple ideas on a daily basis, which will compound over time. So compound interest is one of the most fascinating thing that intrigues me right now. Like compounding effect of how little tweaks, little changes can amount to something larger over a longer period of time. So that is the kind of fascination that I'm trying to incorporate, or a habit that I want to incorporate, and then soon potentially be also gaining more time, because time, I think, is the most valuable essence, and get it to develop more skills in these areas of interest of VR, AR, and the metaverse in general, and be able to more focus time on that and take care of futurely. That's the kind of zone I'm getting into.